Welcome back to the deep dive. I want you to picture something with me for a second. It's an image I see probably 10 times a day.
Oh, I think I know where this is going.
Yeah. I'm scrolling through Instagram or maybe LinkedIn, and I see a guy, and let's be honest, it is almost always a guy.
Right.
He's sitting on some teak deck in Bali. He's got a laptop open, but he's not even looking at it. He's looking out at the ocean.
Of course.
And the caption, it always says something like, I made $5,000 while I slept last night. Ask me how.
It's the modern siren song, isn't it? It is, I think, the most pervasive marketing pitch of the last decade.
It really is. The dream of passive income. It feels like the holy grail of modern economics, at least for the average person.
Right.
We're not just being sold a financial product. We're being sold an exit strategy.
An escape hatch.
Exactly. The pitch is you can quit the 9 to 5, you can stop trading your time for money, and you build a machine that prints cash forever.
And it's a beautiful dream. I mean, frankly, who wouldn't want that? The idea of decoupling your survival from your labor is, well, it's the ultimate freedom.
It is.
But as we so often find on these deep dives, when you actually pull back the curtain and you look at the accounting manuals, the tax codes, the actual economic theory, the reality is, well, it's a lot stickier than the Instagram caption suggests.
And that is exactly why we're here today.
Yeah.
We're going to strip away all of that influencer hype. We've got a stack of sources here that includes everything from IRS publications to these historical economic critiques from the 1930s and even some global tax comparisons.
A pretty wide net.
Our mission today is to figure out what passive income actually is. Not what we wish it was, but what the law and the math says it is.
And that distinction is just so critical because if you confuse the colloquial definition of easy money with the legal definition of passive income, you're not just setting yourself up for disappointment.
No.
You are potentially setting yourself up for a massive tax audit, and nobody wants that.
No, definitely not. So let's start at the very bottom, the bedrock.
Yeah.
If we're looking at the source material, how do we fundamentally define passive income?
Okay, so if we're being really strict, looking at the economic and accounting definitions, passive income is defined as unearned income that is acquired with little to no labor to earn or maintain it.
Little to no labor. That seems to be the operative phrase, doesn't it?
It is. And to really get it, you have to contrast it with what, the vast majority of our listeners are doing right now to earn a living.
Which is earning active income.
Earning active income.
The standard trade. I give you an hour of my life, you give me a set amount of dollars.
Exactly. Wages, salaries, tips, commissions. It doesn't matter if you're a high-powered lawyer billing $1,000 an hour. That is still active income.
Because if you stop showing up,
the money stops flowing. You are the engine. With passive income, the whole goal is to build a machine, step away from it, and have it keep running on its own.
Okay, so that seems simple enough. Bucket A is work. Bucket B is not work. But looking at our notes here, the IRS, they throw a wrench in the gears right away.
They love to do that.
They do. Because I think most people, myself included, would probably say, okay, I buy a stock, I get a dividend check, that's passive income. But the tax man disagrees.
Yeah, this is probably the first and biggest misconception we need to clear up. For the IRS, it's not just 2 buckets. They have 3.
3 buckets.
3 buckets. So bucket 1 is your active income. We just covered that. Bucket 2 is passive income. But bucket 3 is what they call portfolio income.
Portfolio income, okay.
Right. And this bucket covers things like dividends, interest, and capital gains. So strictly speaking, when you buy a share of Apple and get that dividend, or you put money in a savings account and get some interest.
Which is almost nothing these days.
Right. But even that tiny amount, the IRS classifies that as portfolio income, not passive income.
Why does that distinction matter? I mean, is it just semantics? Or does it have real-world consequences?
Oh, it has huge consequences when you get to tax time. Specifically, it matters when it comes to losses. Let's say you have what the IRS defines as passive losses, maybe from a rental property that's not making money yet. You generally cannot use those passive losses to offset your portfolio income.
So you can't use your bad real estate deal to cancel out the taxes on your stock gains.
You got it. They're siloed. The IRS wants to keep them separate to prevent people from, sheltering their investment gains with paper losses from completely different ventures. It's a way to stop people from gaming the system.
That's really interesting. So for the rest of this conversation, we're probably going to talk about passive income in that broader, more colloquial sense.
Money you don't actively work for.
Right. Money you don't work for. But we have to keep that legal asterisk in our minds that the IRS sees things differently.
We do. And there's one more nuance from the expert side of our notes that I think really sets the stage for everything else we're going to talk about.
Which is?
The host perspective, the dream, the Bali deck, is that it's free money.
Right.
But the source material emphasizes over and over again, passive income is almost never free. It is an acquired income.
What do you mean by acquired?
It means it usually requires one of two things. Either a massive upfront accumulation of capital,
Cash.
lots of cash, or it requires a long, intense period of work, often unpaid work, before that passive phase can even begin.
So you're either paying for it with cash you already earned through active work, or you're paying for it with sweat equity up front. There's no escaping the payment.
Precisely. You have to build the hydroelectric dam before you can sit back and watch the reservoir fill up. You can't just stand by the river and expect electricity.
That is a perfect analogy.
Okay.
Okay, so let's map out where we're going today. We're going to start by looking at the different vehicles for this income, from the boring bank accounts to the volatile stock market.
A whole spectrum of risk.
Then we're going to get into real estate, which, as I mentioned, has some fascinating philosophical baggage attached to it.
The improperty concept. Yes, I'm excited to get to that. It's a real mind bender.
And then we'll touch on the new digital world, those so-called loopholes or strategies, depending on who you ask.
Right.
And finally, we'll take a trip around the world to see how countries like China and Russia and even Kazakhstan handle this kind of wealth.
Sounds like a plan.
Okay, let's jump into section 1. The spectrum of income sources. And let's start with, I think, the safest, maybe the dullest place you can put your money, the bank.
Deposits. Yeah, it's not sexy, but it is the absolute foundation of the financial system.
The idea here is about as simple as it gets. I give the bank my money, they hold it, they pay me interest. But let's be real, a standard savings account pays, what, pennies?
In many economic climates, yes. I mean, the real rate of return can actually be negative once you factor in inflation. Your money is losing purchasing power.
So what's the actual passive income vehicle here?
The sources highlight a specific one, the certificate of deposit or a CD.
Ah, the CD. I remember my grandmother giving me a CD for my birthday when I was a kid. I was so disappointed because I couldn't spend it.
That is the entire mechanism of the CD. It's a contract. You are literally agreeing to lock away a fixed amount of money for a fixed period of time, 6 months, a year, 5 years. You are selling your liquidity to the bank.
And in exchange for me not being able to touch my own money, they pay me a slightly higher interest rate.
Correct. It's a premium for stability. The bank can lend that money out with more confidence because they know you can't just walk in and demand it all back tomorrow without paying a massive penalty.
Right, there are penalties for early withdrawal.
Big ones, yeah.
And the sources mention the scaling here. It's not a one-size-fits-all rate.
No, not at all. Generally, a larger principal, meaning you deposit more money, and a longer term will yield a better interest rate. A $10,000 5-year CD will pay a lot more than a $1,000 6-month CD.
So what's the verdict on this? Who is this for?
It is the definition of low risk, low reward. It prioritizes safety above all else. You aren't going to get rich off CD interest unless you start with millions and millions of dollars, but you also aren't going to wake up and find your account balance has dropped by 20% overnight.
Which brings us, very neatly, to the vehicle where you can wake up to a 20% drop, the stock market.
The market route. This is where the majority of, let's say, middle-class passive wealth generation happens.
Okay, but we need to break down the two ways you actually make money here, because I think people conflate them all the time. There's growth and there is income.
Yes. This is a really important distinction. Mechanism number 1 is value growth. You buy a share of a company for $100. The company does well, it innovates, its market cap increases. The share is now worth $120.
But that $20 is theoretical.
Right.
It's just a number on a screen until I sell it.
Exactly. That is a capital gain, and it is only realized upon sale. It's not income until you cash it out. The second mechanism, the part that feels more like passive income, is dividend payments.
This is the actual check in the mail or the deposit in my account.
That's right. This is distributed profit. The company made money, they covered their costs, they reinvested whatever they needed for future growth, and they still had a pile of cash left over, so they cut a check to the owners, the shareholders.
The source material specifically mentions index funds here as the sort of default strategy for most people. Why is that?
Because picking individual stocks is incredibly difficult, and the data shows that even most professionals can't beat the market over the long term.
The whole monkeys throwing darts at a newspaper thing.
Pretty much. So an index fund like one that tracks the S&P 500 allows you to buy a tiny slice of the entire market. You own a little piece of 500 of the biggest companies. You aren't betting on one horse, you're betting on the whole racetrack. It just mirrors the market indices.
But unlike that CD we were just talking about, there is absolutely no guarantee here.
None whatsoever. The biggest risk is volatility. Prices fluctuate, sometimes wildly, based on news, on economic data, on investor sentiment.
Fear and greed.
Fear and greed. The source specifically highlights value stocks. These are often established, dividend-paying companies that maybe aren't growing super fast as facing uncertainty in future earnings. If a company has a bad year, what's the first thing they can do to save cash?
Cut the dividend.
Cut that dividend to zero, and suddenly your income stream is gone.
So this profile is for the risk tolerant. If you're going to lose sleep because your portfolio is down 5% one week, this isn't passive for you, it's just stress.
Exactly. Emotional labor is still labor. If it costs you your peace of mind, it's not passive.
Okay, let's move to the third lane. Bonds. I feel like bonds are the thing everyone knows they should understand, but almost nobody actually does.
It's true. They're sort of the sensible, boring cousin of stocks, but understanding them is key. Bonds are the lending route. So when you buy a stock, you're an owner. When you buy a bond, you are a lender.
You become the bank.
You are the bank. You are loaning your money to a government or a city or a big corporation.
And the sources say understanding the mechanics here is really important because it explains the risk profile.
It does. A bond has a few key components you need to know. There's the issue price, which is what you pay. There's the face value, which is what it's worth at the end. There's the coupon rate, which is your interest. And the maturity date, which is when you get paid back.
Okay, stop right there. Coupon rate. I love this term because it feels so incredibly old-fashioned. Why do we call it a coupon?
It's a great bit of financial history. It's because before everything was electronic, bonds were these beautiful, ornate, physical certificates. Paper.
Like a stock certificate you see in old movies.
Yeah. Exactly like that. And at the bottom of the certificate, they had literal tear-off coupons. Each one had a date on it. If your bond paid interest every 6 months, you would take a pair of scissors, clip the coupon for that date, walk into a bank, and hand it to the teller.
No way. And they just give you cash.
They'd give you your interest payment. That is why we still talk about coupon clipping as a slang term for living off investments. It comes from a literal physical act.
That's amazing. So the income stream is this. I buy the bond, I get my regular coupon payments, and then at the very end, the maturity date, I get my original loan amount back.
Ideally, yes, that's the plan. The main risk there is if the borrower goes bankrupt. If the company you lent money to goes under, you might get pennies on the dollar or nothing at all.
But there's a twist here, according to the sources, regarding resale, because you don't have to hold it until the very end.
This is the part that confuses people, but it's where the other major risk comes in. You can sell a bond on the secondary market, just like a stock. And the price of that bond fluctuates based on what's happening with interest rates in the wider world.
Okay, walk us through that. Give me an example.
Okay, let's say you buy a 10-year government bond today that pays 5% interest. It's a great deal. But a year from now, the Federal Reserve raises interest rates to fight inflation, and new bonds are being issued that pay 7%.
Suddenly, nobody wants my old 5% bond anymore.
Exactly. Why would they buy your 5% bond when they can get a brand new 7% one? It's trash compared to the new stuff. So if you want to sell it before it matures, you have to sell it at a discount. You lose money on the principal.
But the reverse is also true.
The reverse is also true. Say you buy that bond at 5% and then the economy tanks and the Fed drops interest rates to 2%.
My 5% bond is now a gold mine.
It's a golden goose. It's paying way more than anything else on the market, so you can sell it for a premium for more than you paid for it. That's why bonds, while generally safer and less volatile than stocks, still carry interest rate risk.
Okay, so we've covered deposits, stocks, and bonds, the big three. But there's one more category in this section that I found really interesting because it sounds like something out of a gangster movie. Silent partnerships.
It does sound dramatic, doesn't it? But It's a very legitimate and actually pretty common business structure. A silent partner is an individual whose participation in a business is limited strictly to providing capital.
They're the money guy, the bankroll.
They are the bankroll.
Yeah.
And crucially, to qualify as a silent partner in the eyes of the law and the IRS, they play no role in the day-to-day management of the business.
So I can't just walk into the restaurant I invested in and tell the chef to change the menu.
You cannot. You can't hire, you can't fire, you can't make strategy decisions. If you start doing that, you're no longer a silent partner. You're just a partner, and you lose your special status and usually your liability protection.
So because you're purely providing capital, the income you receive, which is an agreed upon percentage of the gross profits, it's considered passive.
This feels like one of the purest forms of passive income we've discussed because it's explicitly defined by the absence of labor. You are being paid for taking a financial risk, not for doing any work.
Exactly.
All right, let's shift gears a bit. We're leaving the world of paper assets and moving into the physical world. Bricks and mortar, Section 2,
Yeah.
the improperty of real estate.
This is the classic path, right? When people think financial independence, they usually think of a portfolio of rental properties.
For sure. Buy a duplex, rent out one half, have the tenant pay your mortgage while you live in the other. It's the quintessential dream.
It is. But the source material took us down a really fascinating rabbit hole here with a term I had never, ever heard before. Improperty.
Yes. This comes from the economist J.A. Hobson, and he was writing back in the 1930s. It's a concept that I really wish was taught more in Economics 101 because it reframes the whole conversation.
So what is improperty? Break it down for us.
Hobson was trying to make a critical distinction between property that you use to create value, like a hammer or a workshop or even your own home that you live in, and improperty. Improperty, in his view, is asset ownership used specifically for the purpose of extracting income from other individuals.
Extracting is a very loaded word.
It was meant to be. He was launching a critique of the philosophical underpinnings of landlordism. His argument basically is that if I'm a carpenter and I build a chair, I have created new value in the world. A chair exists that didn't exist before.
Right.
But if I own a plot of land and I just charge you rent to stand on it, I haven't actually created anything new. I am just charging you for access to something that already exists. I am extracting wealth from your labor simply because I hold the deed.
It connects to that old idea of economic rent, doesn't it? The idea of unearned value.
It does, very closely. It's the idea of unearned increments of value. But philosophy aside for a moment, this tension is what makes real estate such a polarizing topic in our society.
Yeah.
It's incredibly lucrative for the owner, but it is often viewed as parasitic by the tenant.
Well, let's get into the mechanics of it, because regardless of the philosophy, people do it every day. The basics of rental income. Tenants pay you rent. Or maybe companies pay you royalties for using your land for, say, a cell tower.
The pros are pretty obvious. It can be a very steady stream of cash flow. It offers the potential for appreciation. The building itself gets more valuable over time. And unlike stocks, you have a high degree of control over the asset.
What do you mean by control?
You can renovate the kitchen, you can add a deck, you can improve the landscaping, you can actively force the value of your asset to go up. You can't call up the CEO of Apple and tell him how to design the next iPhone.
A very good point. But then there are the cons, starting with the high initial investment cost. You can't buy a house for $50 like you can a stock.
Not unless you're in a very specific market. And then there's the biggest debate of all, the one that ties back to our core theme. Is it actually passive?
This is the reality check. The source distinction here is sharp. It says rental income is only passive if it hasn't turned into an everyday job.
And anyone who has ever been a landlord knows this struggle intimately. The managerial duties. Finding tenants, screening them, running credit checks, collecting the rent, which can be a nightmare.
Dealing with noise complaints at 10 p.m. on a Tuesday.
And, of course, the dreaded 3 a.m. phone call that the water heater has exploded and is flooding the downstairs apartment.
Right. If I am the one driving over there with a wrench at 3 in the morning, that is not passive income. That is a very stressful, very low-paying job as a crisis manager.
Exactly. That is labor. So to make it truly passive, you have to use what the industry calls the outsourcing loophole.
Which means you hire a property manager.
You hire a leasing agent, you pay someone else, usually 10 to 12% of the gross monthly rent, to handle all the headaches. They take the 3 a.m. phone call.
But that changes the math completely.
It changes the math drastically. Now, that rent check you receive has to cover the mortgage, the insurance, the property taxes, a fund for future maintenance, and the management fee. If there is still profit left over after all of that,
Then you have passive income.
then and only then. It seems like the profit margins are much, much thinner than people realize if they want true hands-off passivity.
It sounds like many passive real estate investors are actually just buying themselves a part-time job as a janitor and bookkeeper.
That's a very accurate way to put it.
Now, before we leave this section on property, we should touch on royalties. The sources group this with real estate because it's about payment for the use of an asset. But instead of a physical house, it's an idea.
Intellectual property, things like books, music, patents, trademarks, an idea that you own.
But the IRS has a very specific and interesting caveat here.
They do. They have to draw a line somewhere. They say royalties are only considered passive income if they are not derived in the ordinary course of a trade or business.
Okay, can you give me an example of that? That sounds a little abstract.
Sure. Think of a famous author like Stephen King. He writes books. That is his job. That is his trade. The royalties he gets from his publisher for The Shining are considered active income.
Why?
Because he is in the business of writing books. That's what he does. It's the ordinary course of his business.
Okay, that makes sense. So what's an example of passive royalty income?
Okay, imagine a dentist. She works on teeth all day long. That's her business. But one weekend, she's tinkering in her garage, and she invents a new, more ergonomic handle for a dental mirror. She patents it. She then licenses that patent to a big medical supply manufacturer. Then she goes back to her normal job of fixing teeth.
And the royalty checks for her invention start rolling in.
Those checks would almost certainly be considered passive income by the IRS. She is not a professional inventor. It was not in her ordinary course of business. The income is derived from her ownership of the patent, not from her daily labor as a dentist.
That is a fascinating distinction. It's that separation again between the creator and the owner.
It is. And that actually leads us perfectly into our next section, section 3, because the line between creator and owner is getting really, really blurry in the digital age.
The gray area, what the source material calls leveraged income.
This is the stuff that absolutely dominates your social media feed. Ebooks, video courses, software as a service, digital templates.
I feel like every single person I know has a side hustle trying to sell a PDF template for something.
And the source defines this not as passive income, strictly speaking, but as leveraged income. And the difference in terminology is important.
Okay, what is the difference?
Passive income implies the asset itself does all the earning. A stock dividend, for example. Leveraged income, on the other hand, acknowledges that you have to put in a massive amount of active labor once to create a product that can then be sold, theoretically, indefinitely.
So if I write an ebook on, I don't know, gardening, I might spend 200 hours writing and editing it. That is very active work.
Huge active work. And it's unpaid active work at that point. You're working entirely on spec. But once that digital file is created and uploaded to the server,
The cost to sell it to one person is essentially the same as the cost to sell it to 1 million people.
zero marginal cost of reproduction. That is the magic of digital products. If you make physical chairs and you want to sell 100 more chairs, you need more wood, more glue, and more hours from a carpenter.
Right.
If you want to sell 100 more copies of your digital course on gardening, you just need a slightly better server hosting plan. The leverage is immense.
And that scalability is why it's so easily confused with passive income, because after the launch, after the hard work is done, it feels passive. The sales come in while you're sleeping.
It feels passive because the labor is decoupled from the individual transaction. You don't have to be there physically or digitally when the customer clicks buy.
But the source material warns us about a massive cognitive bias here, the survivorship bias.
Oh, it's huge in this space. We only ever see the winners. We see the one guy who made $1 million selling a course on how to make the perfect toast.
Right.
We don't see the 10,000 other people who spent 6 months of their lives making a course that sold 3 copies, 2 of which were to their parents.
So it's extremely high risk, high reward. It's almost like a lottery ticket that you buy with your time instead of your money.
That is a great way to put it. The potential payoff is huge, but the odds of success are very, very long.
Okay, we've covered the fun stuff, the dreams, the different ways to make this happen. Now we have to put on our suits and talk to the reality police. Section 4, the IRS and the taxman.
This is where the rubber truly meets the road. If you are in the United States, the IRS has a very, very strict set of rules for what counts, and it often doesn't align with our intuition.
We mentioned the buckets earlier, active, passive, portfolio. But we really need to dig into the wall that separates active and passive. The source keeps mentioning this phrase, material participation.
This is the golden key. Material participation is the legal test the IRS uses to decide if you are an investor or if you are a worker in a particular activity.
How do they measure it? Is it subjective?
They try to make it as objective as possible, and it mostly comes down to hours. There are actually 7 different tests you can meet, but the big one, the one most people talk about, is the 500-hour rule.
The 500-hour rule.
Right. If you spend more than 500 hours a year on a business activity, the IRS generally says, congratulations, you are materially participating. This is active income, not passive.
So if I work too hard on my side hustle, I can accidentally make it active in the eyes of the IRS.
Yes, exactly. And that can be good or bad, depending on your situation. It matters because, generally speaking, people sometimes want income to be classified as passive so they can offset it with other passive losses.
Oh, for the tax strategy.
Right. But other times, you might want it to be active. For example, you can't contribute to certain retirement plans like a 401k from passive income. It has to be earned, active income. So the classification changes your entire financial strategy.
Okay, let's circle back to real estate for a minute. But the IRS rules here are wildly specific. I was reading through the source notes on what they call the hotel exceptions, and it felt like I was doing logic puzzles.
It's designed to stop people from gaming the system. The IRS needs to draw a clear line. Are you a landlord, which is a passive activity, or are you running a hotel, which is a service business?
So let's start with rule number 1, the 7 days or less rule.
This one is huge for the Airbnb generation. The IRS says that if the average period of customer use for your property is 7 days or less, it is not a rental activity.
Wait. If it's not a rental activity, what is it?
It's a trade or business, like a hotel.
So all those people renting out their beach condos for the weekend.
If their average stay is short, they aren't passive real estate investors in the eyes of the IRS. They are active business owners. And this has a massive tax implication.
Which is?
It means the income might be subject to self-employment tax. That's Social Security and Medicare tax, which is an extra 15.3% tax hit that a normal passive landlord doesn't have to pay.
Ouch. That is a nasty surprise if you're not expecting it.
A very nasty surprise. Then you have the next rule, the Significant Personal Services Rule. This one applies if the average stay is 30 days or less.
So like a midterm rental for a traveling nurse or something.
Exactly. The rule says if you rent for 30 days or less and you provide significant personal services, it's not a rental. It's a business.
Okay, what counts as a significant service? Is cleaning the place between tenants significant?
No, things like cleaning the common areas or fixing the roof don't count. That's just considered normal for being a landlord. But if you are changing the linens every day, providing breakfast, offering guided tours of the city, or providing room service,
They're not a landlord anymore. You're a bed and breakfast.
you're a business, not a passive investment. And again, subject to that self-employment tax.
There was one more exception in the notes that I thought was really niche but interesting. The Extraordinary Personal Services Rule.
This covers things where the rental is incidental to the service. Think about a hospital or a college dorm. Technically, when you're in a hospital, you are paying for the use of the room. But the IRS says, no, the real value here is the doctors, the nurses, the medical care. The room is incidental to the service. So a hospital cannot claim its room fees as passive rental income.
That makes perfect sense. It's logically consistent, even if it's complicated. Now, I want to talk about a specific loophole that the source material flagged. It's called self-charged interest.
Ah, yes. This is financial inception. It gets a little weird.
It sounds like I'm lending money to myself and paying myself interest.
Effectively, you are. Let's set up a scenario. Say you own an S corporation. You are the sole owner. The business needs a cash infusion. Instead of going to a bank, you, the individual, lend the business $100,000 from your personal savings.
Okay, so the business now owes me, the person, money.
And the business pays you interest on that loan, let's say 5% a year. Now, normally, where does interest income go?
Into that third bucket, portfolio income.
Right. But the self-charged interest rule says that if the business uses that borrowed money for a passive activity, say buying a rental property that you don't materially participate in, then the IRS allows you to recharacterize the interest income you receive. You can treat it as passive income.
Why on earth would I want to do that?
Because of the buckets. It's all about the buckets. If you have other passive losses, maybe that rental property you bought is losing money on paper because of depreciation, you can now use those passive losses to offset this passive interest income.
So I'm matching the income to the loss to zero out my tax bill on that interest.
You've created a closed loop. It's an incredibly clever and perfectly legal tax planning strategy, but it's also incredibly complex.
It is. And this leads us to the big critique in the source material.
Mm.
All of these rules, self-charged interest, material participation, depreciation, the hotel exceptions, they are ridiculously complicated. Who is this system actually built for?
The wealthy. The sources are very, very blunt about this. High-income groups use these complex passive income strategies for tax avoidance.
Because they're the only ones who can afford the teams of accountants and lawyers to figure this stuff out.
That's a huge part of it. But it's also that they have the capital to diversify into all these different areas. They have S-corp, they have partnerships, they have stocks, they have real estate. They can structure their income to flow into the buckets that have the lowest tax rates.
Meanwhile, the average middle-class worker gets a W-2 from their employer.
And the IRS knows exactly what they made, down to the penny. There is no hiding a paycheck. There is no structuring your salary to be a capital gain or to be offset by passive losses.
This is what they call the wage tax argument.
Exactly. The critics in our sources argue that the U.S. tax code, in practice, has degraded into a tax on wages. It primarily targets the working class and the middle class. If you work for a living, you pay high marginal rates. If you own things for a living, you pay much lower rates on capital gains, or you use depreciation and other tricks to pay nothing at all.
The stats in the source material seem to back this up. It says about 20% of Americans receive some form of passive income.
But for the vast majority of that 20%, it's peanuts. It's less than $5,000 a year. It's the interest from a small savings bond or a tiny dividend check from a few shares of stock.
It's not the Bali lifestyle.
It's not the Bali lifestyle. The number of people actually living the passive income lifestyle is statistically tiny. It is a game played at the very top of the economic pyramid.
So that is the rather complicated view from the United States.
Mm-hmm.
But money is global. I want to zoom out for our last section, Section 5. How do other countries handle this? Is the U.S. unique in this system that seems to favor the owner over the worker?
It varies quite a bit, but you see similar patterns. Let's start with Europe.
Is there a unified European definition of passive income?
No, not at all. This is a common misconception. The European Union is a political union, but it is not a fiscal one. The EU itself lacks direct taxation powers.
So every country is on its own?
Every country makes its own rules. France has different rules than Germany, which has different rules than Ireland, which is why so many tech companies are headquartered there for tax reasons.
But there is some kind of standardization in reporting, right, to stop people from hiding money?
Yes. The OECD, that's the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, introduced something called the Common Reporting Standard, or CRS.
And what did that do?
It basically provides a guideline list for financial institutions. It says, hey, countries, you should generally consider dividends, interest, rents, annuities, and things like financial swaps as passive income. It's a way to get countries to share data with each other automatically to catch tax evaders, but it doesn't dictate the tax rate.
For the rates, we have to look at specific countries. Let's go east and look at China. Their approach is stark.
Very stark. China uses a flat tax for passive and unearned income. It is taxed at a proportional rate of 20%.
20%. Flat. Doesn't matter if I make 100 yuan or 100 million yuan for my investments.
Correct. 20%. Now, contrast that with active income wages from a job. In China, that is subject to a progressive rate that goes all the way up to 45% for high earners.
Wow. Okay, so let me get this straight. If I work incredibly hard and become a top surgeon in China and earn a high salary, I give nearly half of it to the government.
Correct.
But if I just sit back and collect interest and dividends on my massive inheritance, I only give 20%.
That is the math. And the source material explicitly critiques this. It calls this system horizontally unfair.
Horizontal unfairness. Explain that term for us.
Horizontal equity is a basic principle of taxation that says people with similar income levels should pay similar amounts of tax.
Makes sense.
But in this system, two people could both make, say, the equivalent of $500,000. The surgeon pays a very high rate. The capital owner pays a much lower rate. Their tax burdens are wildly different, even though their income is the same. It is horizontally unfair.
And the source argues this fails to regulate the income gap.
It does the opposite. It exacerbates it. It explicitly favors capital owners over workers, which by its very nature accelerates wealth concentration at the top.
Okay, let's move north from there to Russia. They are famous for their flat tax.
Yes, the 13% rule. For a long time, Russia had a flat 13% tax on almost everything, which was a huge simplification of their old system. For passive income, tax is withheld on security sales if they're sold for a profit on bond coupons and on dividends.
And they have a very specific formula for the calculation.
Yes, it's very clear. It is sales amount minus any sales commissions minus the original purchase amount minus any purchase commissions times 13%. It's purely a tax on the net profit.
What if I lose money? What if I sell my stock for less than I bought it for?
If the asset loses value, no tax is paid. It's very straightforward. You only pay tax on your gains.
And for non-residents, if I'm an American wanting to invest in the Russian market.
The rules are slightly different. If you are an outsider investing in Russia, the dividend tax bumps up from 13 to 15%.
Okay, finally, let's look at Kazakhstan. The source highlighted them as a really interesting outlier, using tax policy in a very aggressive way.
Kazakhstan is essentially using its tax policy as a giant magnet for capital. Their base rate for dividends is an already low 5% income tax.
5% is incredibly low. That's lower than sales tax in those places.
It is. But here is the real kicker. Dividends and capital gains on securities that are listed on the official Kazakh stock exchanges are often excluded from taxable passive income entirely.
Excluded, you mean 0% tax?
Tax-free. Zero.
Why on earth would they do that? What's the strategy?
The strategy is to encourage local investment. They are trying to build up their domestic capital markets. They want people, both local and foreign, to move their money into the Kazakh stock exchange. So they are effectively saying, if you come play in our sandbox, you get to play for free.
That is one of the clearest examples of using a tax code for social or economic engineering I've ever heard.
Absolutely, and it's a great reminder that tax codes are never neutral. They're never just about raising revenue. They always tell you what a society, or at least its government, values.
And what do these examples tell us?
They tell us that Kazakhstan values capital investment right now above all else. And they tell us that, in their own ways, both China and the U.S. currently value capital ownership over labor.
It's a pretty sobering realization when you lay it all out like that.
It is.
We have traveled a long, long way in this deep dive. From the safety of a bank vault to the volatility of the stock market, from the philosophical concept of improperty in the 1930s to the nitty-gritty of the IRS 7-day rule for Airbnbs.
And all the way to the steppes of Kazakhstan.
It's been quite a journey. If we had to boil all of this down for the listener, the one who started this episode dreaming of that beach chair in Bali, what is the single biggest takeaway?
I would say this. Passive income is real, but it's not a verb. It's a noun. It is not something you do. It is something you own.
You don't passive income. You own assets that generate income.
Exactly. And the transition from being a laborer, someone who trades their time for money, to being an owner, someone whose assets generate money for them, is the hardest financial leap anyone can make. It's a fundamental shift in your relationship with the economy.
It requires sacrifice, it requires risk, and as we learned with that leveraged income section, it often requires a massive amount of unpaid active work just to get the engine started.
And then, if you're lucky enough to get there, you find yourself in a system that is, in many ways, designed to help you stay there. The tax code becomes a map, but it's a map written in a language that heavily favors the owners.
Which brings us right back around to that provocative thought from J.A. Hobson. Improperty.
It's the question that really sticks with me from all of this.
If our entire global economic system, from the supposedly capitalist U.S. to the supposedly communist China, is wired to tax labor heavily and tax ownership lightly, what does that say about our collective values?
Right.
Are we implicitly saying that the person who holds the wealth is more valuable to society than the person who creates the wealth through their work?
It's a profound question. Do we, as a society, value the past, which is what accumulated capital is, more than we value the present, which is active effort and labor?
That is definitely something to chew on the next time you look at your pay stub or the next time you see one of those get-rich-sleeping ads online. That's it for this deep dive into passive income. We hope you feel a little smarter, maybe a little more cynical, and a lot better prepared to argue with your accountant. Thanks for listening.
See you next time.